There's a legend that comes from the bluesmen of the Mississippi Delta. If you want to play your guitar really well, there is a way, if you dare. You must take it to a crossroads at midnight. A tall, dark man will approach you. Don't be afraid. Hand him your instrument and let him tune it. When he gives it back to you, you'll find that you can make your guitar sing and cry. But beware, that man is the devil. And the price of playing the guitar that well is your soul. The story goes that that's what happened to a blues guitarist called Robert Johnson at a crossroads just outside of Clarksdale, Mississippi. In a way, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. The myth has stuck. Johnson played brilliantly, recorded very little, lived fast and died young. That was enough to make him a guitar hero when the blues were rediscovered by a new generation of rock guitarists in the 60s. Many came here as pilgrims to Clarksdale to see the crossroads for themselves. But by then, the instrument itself had been transformed, made its own pact with the devil, when the guitar turned electric. "70 years after Robert Johnson's death, look what the guitar has become. An icon of popular culture, a fashion accessory, shop window shorthand for a flirtation with rebellion and sexuality. And maybe people sensed its potential long ago.
The name of my ailment was longing, and it was not cured till I finally went to the department store and counted out the money in small coins before the dismayed clerk. A moment later, the shining instrument under my arm, I could scarcely wait till I reached home to break the news to my father and mother. I knew how the other youngsters would gather around, and I had no doubt that I would be able to entertain the girls royally.
The man who wrote that was W.C. Handy, known as the father of the blues. Unfortunately, when he got it home, his father ordered him to take the sinful thing back and buy a dictionary instead. But there is something here I wanted to see, something that in retrospect now seems very significant. This place is a shrine, and this unprepossessing object is the Holy of Holies. It's affectionately known as the frying pan, and it transformed the story of modern music. This is the very first electric guitar. Believe it or not, the first electric guitar wasn't designed to play blues or jazz, but this, Hawaiian music, an exotic sound that was all the rage around the world in the early 20th century. The trademark Hawaiian sound was achieved by sliding a metal bar known as a steel up and down the strings of a guitar laid flat across the lap.
Hawaiian guitar went around the world. It was the first world music craze. It was the first guitar craze. It was a sound nobody had ever heard before. One day in the 1880s, a fellow named Joseph Keikuku reportedly was walking down the railroad tracks with his guitar on his back, and he found a railroad spike, slid it along the strings, and the light bulb went on. And he hid out with it for about 7 years, working on it, and unleashed it on the world. By 1904, he was playing in front of the King and Queen of England. By 1916, more Hawaiian records were selling in America than any other kind of records. It became this exotic novelty. There were kind of sexual connotations of, the white guy having an experience with a native girl, and it was all very romantic in an era where people didn't travel very far from their home usually. And so by the 1920s, every middle-sized town in America had a quote-unquote Hawaiian band playing in the local restaurants. Come back to Hawaii, the sad waves are sighing for you.
It was absolutely extraordinary. It was so popular that you would have cowboy bands, which basically is bands of ordinary people wearing cowboy clothes so they look like cowboys. And they would play as, say, for example, the barn dance troubadours on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And then they would change their outfits and put on their colorful shirts, and they would play as the Waikiki troubadours on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And so you had the same instrumentation both times, and that is how the pedal steel guitar became such a staple of country music.
It really was the first time that the guitar was a featured instrument. Remember, in the typical dance orchestra of the day, the banjo was the rhythm instrument, and the guitar was only just coming in as a rhythm instrument. But in the 20s, the only soloists were the lap players.
But it wasn't the first time that this haunting sound had been heard in America. It was also to be found in the less than exotic Mississippi Delta, a guitar style known as blues bottleneck.
You'll forever be on my mind.
The age-old question of which came first, Hawaiian slide guitar or blues bottleneck guitar, is an unanswered question. For one, I think if you take a human being, a string, and a hard object, eventually they're going to seek to imitate the voice.
In 1903, W.C. Handy, the same young man who'd suffered so acutely from guitar lust as a boy, had another momentous encounter with the instrument. He fell asleep at the station in the backwater town of Tutwiler, Mississippi, while waiting for a train. According to Handy, he was woken by an unearthly sound.
A lean, loose-jointed Negro had commenced plunking a guitar beside me while I slept. His clothes were rags. His face had on it some of the sadness of the ages. As he played, he pressed a knife on the strings of the guitar. It was the weirdest music I had ever heard.
It became one of the most influential and expressive forms of self-accompaniment with the guitar in what we call the blues.
Yeah, slide really does make you feel that way because it's such a terrific thing. And sometimes it really is transcendental music. It's been a while since I did that.
I play the blues, brings a sad feeling, like when you're downhearted and you can sing about it, how how hard you came up or how hard you worked and all that kind of stuff like that. That's somebody down, That's what the blues will really make you think about. But got me running, you got me hiding. playing the blues, you was down hard, having a hard time or whatever, like I say, just get those sad blues, kind of helps you out a little.
The fact is that guitar blues was never a popular style, and guitar players were so poor that the guitar was described as the starvation box. It was the outsider's instrument long before it became cool. Many of the early blues guitarists were blind and had no other means of earning a living on the road. It's hard for us to imagine today because blues guitar has become part of the bedrock of popular music. But in the 20s and 30s, it had no significant commercial influence on the evolution of a guitar. That was all happening in the Hawaiian bands. And it was here that trouble was brewing, as the guitar simply wasn't loud enough.
Because the guitar is not naturally a very loud instrument, and in any case they were playing, the featured guy, the guy who was playing the solos was playing it like this, so the sound was going up into the rafters. That was the beginning of the efforts to amplify the guitar.
And it was all thanks to a laptop player named George Beecham, who teamed up with a Slovak violin maker called John de Piera, who had an ingenious idea using not wood, but metal.
You'll see inside there are 3 cones in here. This guitar resonating cone was invented the same year as the loudspeaker, and they look very similar. It's a conical thing with a crimped edge so it can bounce up and down. And these things basically amplify mechanically and project the sound. It's Victrola technology. It's not electrical. And the volume on this is absolutely incredible. I had the fortune of knowing Mr. Topera before his death, and one of the questions I asked him is, well, what did you think the first day when you first strung up the first one you made? And I never forget what he said. He said, I went home to my wife and I said, Jesus, we got a hell of a something here.
But it wasn't enough for George Beecham, who moved on to a hell of a something else. And the key was electricity.
You're crazy! Crazy, am I? We'll see whether I'm crazy or not.
Tinkering with electronics had become as American as apple pie and singing cowboys. Beecham was relying on a basic electrical principle to amplify the sound of the guitar's strings. That metal lump on this wooden prototype is called a pickup, and it's essentially a horseshoe magnet wrapped in a coil of wire. When the string is plucked, its vibration creates a disturbance in the magnetic field, which produces an electrical signal. It's this which was then amplified to take its place on the typical American bandstand. Blink and you've missed it. But this is the earliest known footage of Beecham's electric guitar in action.
By playing around with you.
Here's a 1930s Rickenbacker frying pan. You can see why they might have called it the frying pan. It's a cast aluminum. Neck and body as one unit. The strings are raised for Hawaiian-style playing, and of course, without plugging it in, not much volume there.
From this moment on, the electric guitar would be tethered to and absolutely dependent upon its mate, the amplifier. The instrument had changed forever.
So one can debate whether biological evolution took place or whether it happened as it did in the Bible, but I don't think anybody's going to debate that this is the first model electric guitar, and from this arose all those others.
At the very same time, a boy from Wisconsin was obsessing about how to get more volume from his guitar. That boy is now a legend, and he's still playing every Monday night in New York City.
He's a wild and sexy guitar god. And he looks pretty hot for 91.
Les Paul is the name on one of the world's most popular electric guitars, favoured by players from Jimmy Page to Slash. And his reputation as a sonic genius is secured by his invention of multi-track recording, featured in a string of hit records that he made in the 40s and 50s.
Here are Les Paul and his wife, Mary Ford, returning home from a Hollywood premiere to tell you about how they make Capitol Records right at home. They did the multiple recording of 10 guitars and 12 voices for How High the Moon at home here in Hollywood, and keep recorders in their New York apartment and even in their car.
Well, yes, this is the house where we made those records last year.
His career in music has followed the fortunes of the guitar and that perennial struggle to be heard. As Les himself put it, back in the 30s, more volume meant more tips, so he decided to electrify.
The first time I tried it, I used a phonograph pickup, took the needle and I put it right down here. And when I did that, I got feedback and all kinds of problems. And none of them were complimentary.
So you just took apart
your
father's Vitrola?
No, I took the telephone.
You took the telephone?
Took the telephone. If you have a telephone, you talk into the transmitter, you talk into the send, and you're talking to somebody, that's a microphone. This part that you listen to is just two magnetic coils, okay? Those coils are wound on magnets, and by taking those out of the phone and putting them under the string, I said, lo and behold, look what I got, okay? So it was pretty simple. It was right in my living room. I didn't have to leave the living room to build an electric guitar.
But when he amplified his acoustic guitar, Les had all sorts of feedback problems. He began experimenting with more solid materials to get a cleaner sound. So he headed for the railroad track to see which worked best, wood or steel. How did you find that?
Now watch. I live right next to a railroad track. I just borrowed a wagon without the horse, and 6 of us kids pulled the wagon with this railroad track. And we took the railroad track, suspended a string along it, and compared it to a soft piece of wood, like balsa, like pine. And when I heard the wood and I heard the steel railroad track, I went running to my mother and I said, hey, it's the railroad track. That's the answer. And Mother says, the day you see a cowboy on a horse playing up a piece of railroad track. And so that blew that away.
His mother had a point, and we'll come back to that. But Les had only just begun his adventures in electricity, and where better to pursue his quest than the electric city that was New York. When he got there, he seized the chance to conduct some unofficial market research on the electric guitar as it reached its largest audience ever on NBC radio. Les's jazz trio was performing nightly with Fred Waring at the Vanderbilt Theatre on Broadway. The performances were broadcast to an audience of millions via the radio, and many of the listeners wrote in with requests. Les played 2 sets a night, one on the acoustic and one on the electric guitar. The question was, which did everyone like best?
We said, well, let's take a vote on it. But you didn't have to vote. It was hands down, everybody said electric. So I said to Fred, why did you pick the electric? He says, well, everybody hears you. And you can make your sound different than any other guitar player out there. And I said, well, that's basically why I want the electric guitar, is because I'm no longer a wimp with this guitar. I now am a giant, because the saxophone player, I can just turn that volume up. I can turn that volume up, and I'm right in there with the best of them, you know.
Who the hell wants to hear an electric guitar player?
The band leader, Benny Goodman, famously growled, but that was before he heard Charlie Christian play. Boy, did he eat his words.
Now the Duke
group in the band, the sextet, with our new discovery, Charles Christian at the electric guitar. Charlie, I really think, is one of the most terrific musicians who's been produced in years.
Thanks to electricity, the guitar could now compete on equal terms with the dominant brass of the big band era. And it was Charlie Christian who would become the new hero of the electric guitar.
So this is a Charlie Christian guitar, ES-150, with this famous magnetic bar pickup. Of course, the important thing is the electricity, so he's playing lines, he doesn't have to hit the thing, he doesn't have to do chord punctuations or anything, he can just sail. He can just sail away. Lay back on the beat. Then the middle eight line. Back to riff. Now that wouldn't have come across on an acoustic guitar with the band.
Charlie Christian issued a call to arms. Guitar men, he wrote, wake up and pluck, wire for sound, let them hear you play.
The Benny Goodman sextet with Charlie Christian was the first band to use riffs as a basis. So they had a tune like this. See? So the bass, or perhaps the guitar, would be playing that, and the clarinet would be playing the top line. That's called 7-11, and that's obviously the basis of so much music we know. And somebody playing a riff and somebody playing a melody over the top. And when you hear T-Bone Walker or B.B. King, you can hear how that element of Charlie Christian went into the kind of electric blues players.
T-Bone Walker did for blues what Charlie Christian did for jazz, which isn't so surprising when you know they took guitar lessons and gigged together back in Oklahoma City.
Sometimes I wonder, why don't she write to me? Sometimes I wonder.
He took to the spotlight like a natural showman, playing behind his back, with his teeth, doing the splits, but above all, standing up in front of the band. He was the Elvis Presley and Jimi Hendrix of his day. One young man, inspired to pick up the guitar by the playing of T-Bone Walker, was a certain Riley King, who left his job on a Mississippi farm and came here to Beale Street, Memphis. He tried his luck as a singer, but ended up playing guitar with a slot on the segregated radio station, WDIA, where he got his nickname as the Beale Street Blues Boy, and then B.B. King. There's a confusion of kings round here, but the street is now testimony to the success of the man they call the King of the Blues, who after a decade of hard work was able to put together a sizable band to go on tour.
And it was from here in 1955 that he set off in his famous tour bus to bring the blues to the world, and he's still doing it half a century later.
His story, from cotton fields to world tours, has become part of the mythology of the guitar and its embodiment of the American dream. He has lived the life of the guitar man. At the age of 83, he's still going strong and as passionate as ever about the music which inspired him.
I like jazz. I like country. I like gospel. I like some of all kind of music. But I was hypnotized by Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Benny Goodman, Woody Herman. I could just go name you a lot of those guys. I was hypnotized by them. But a guy like me that came from Mississippi, as I did, my guitar has been sort of like a friend. It's been like a tutor. It's been like having someone that would introduce me to people.
BB's fusion of country blues and jazz and his unique sound, bringing his own kind of vibrato to the electric guitar, is instantly recognizable. He's endearingly modest about his playing, and his guitar, Lucille, is almost as well known as he is.
I've been trying to play guitar, I guess, almost 60 years professionally. And I don't know that much about it. I swear I don't. I know the feel of it. I could be in my sleep and you wake me up in the dark, and I can tell if it's my guitar by the way the neck of it feels. But I wanted to be a gospel singer. That's really what I wanted to be, like my pastor in church. My pastor played guitar in the church, so the first electric guitar I ever heard was in the church. But I had a Gibson, a little black Gibson guitar that was non-amplified. So I had some kind of thing you put on them called a pickup that amplified them.
And why did you call that guitar Lucille?
I was playing in one of the states called Arkansas, in a little town called Twist, Arkansas. And it used to get quite cold in winter. And so they used to take something like a big garbage pail, set it in the middle of the dance floor, half fill it with kerosene, light that fuel, and that's what all of us use for heat. Well, people dancing would dance around it. This particular night, two guys started to fight, and one knocked the other one over on this container. It looked like a river of fire. And everybody started to run to the front door, including B.B. King, but I forgot I left my guitar inside. When I got on the outside, I went back for it. So I almost lost my life trying to save my guitar, but I got it. I didn't know the lady that I was told these guys was fighting about, but they tell me her name was Lucille. I never did meet her, but I named the guitar Lucille that very day to remind me never to go back in a abandoned building trying to get a guitar. So from that time until today, my guitar, I don't care if I had 120, they all are Lucille. And I'll tell you, if somebody really wanted to punish me, take it away from me. That would be one of the worst. You could put me in jail, prison, anywhere else, but to take my guitar would be worse than taking, well, I'm not married anymore, but we'll leave that be, but it would be terrible.
As to where his sound came from, BB has always said he was influenced by steel guitar and the bottleneck blues of his cousin, Booker White.
I've got stupid fingers. I never could make mine. I couldn't do any of that. I'm no good at using my hand this way. But I take it and trill it like this. And my old ears said, oh, that sounds a little bit like them.
Kick it off, somebody.
In 1956, BB made 342 appearances in 366 days, plus 3 separate recording sessions. In those days, he was playing to mostly black audiences. Nowadays, they're mostly white males from the baby boomer generation, a legacy of the remarkable turnaround in the fortune of the blues, which saw BB's audience change from 95% black in 1963 to 95% white in 1968. You have really spent your whole life on the road, haven't you? I mean, you're a nomad, really.
Well, yes, but I've had to. Blues hasn't been a popular music in America. And in fact, it seemed like white America didn't even know about blues, only little corners here, corners there. But when the Rolling Stones, the Who, oh God, Cream, and I can name you quite a few groups that came over here after the Beatles. Oh boy, it opened up then.
Well, since my baby left me, well, I found a new place to dwell. Well, it's down at the end of Lonely Street.
Back in the days when BB was still on the radio in Memphis, his music caught the imagination of a young white boy who could often be found hanging round the Beale Street music joints. At the age of 18, that same boy, Elvis Aaron Presley, turned up here at Sun Studios to cut a record for his mother's birthday. Impressed by what he heard, the studio's owner, Sam Phillips, asked Elvis to return for an audition, partnering him with local musicians, Bill Black on bass and Scotty Moore on lead guitar. It was a chance encounter that has defined modern music. They seem to just happen in this part of the world.
All right, guys, this is it. It's pretty small, isn't it? But a lot of big things happen in this little space. And on July 5th, 1954, Elvis stood right here on this X.
Elvis Presley, what kind of name is that? You know, it was a really strange name for that period of time.
Elvis had a great band. Scotty Moore played guitar right where you are, guys, on that X.
And here's Scotty on the Milton Berle Show in 1956. Elvis wasn't the only star discovered by Sam Phillips that night.
Met Sam Phillips at Sun Records. He said, I'd like to see what the boy sounds like with a little music behind him. So it was on tape. See, tape was very fresh in 1954. So we went down there on Monday night, and that's where all hell broke loose.
Red Hot Blue coming through WHBQ and Hotel Chisco.
The resulting track was That's All Right Mama, and 2 nights later it all kicked off on the radio show of Memphis DJ Dewey Phillips.
Sent you for Red, Hot, and Blue. And I got a new song we're going to play here, and they're going to cut loose.
He played it 14 times in 3 hours. The requests kept coming, and Elvis got a recording contract.
All right, Mama, that's all right for you. That's all right, Mama, just any way you do. That's all right. That's all right.
Elvis was playing rhythm, and I'm playing the lead on it. But we're actually both playing rhythm for the most part. It was an audition. See, you had more liberties on an audition than you would if you was actually in there doing a record session to begin with. You could experiment, do whatever you wanted to.
Well, that's all right, Mama.
And it was something different from day one. Bill said, well, hope we don't get run out of town, you know, something like that.
That's all right.
The rest is pop history. Far from being run out of town, Elvis became a star, and the sound of Scotty Moore's guitar cast a spell over a generation.
I never felt like I had a style. I just put in what I could, what little I knew, and went from there.
Guitar-based rock and roll has gone on to dominate popular music in a way those involved on that night in July could hardly have imagined. And Scotty Moore's explanation is more than a little enigmatic.
Have you ever heard about the Mojo Triangle? Well, I thought everybody in the world knew about the Mojo Triangle. All the music that comes from New Orleans to Memphis, up through Clarksville and Mississippi, up to Memphis, up to Nashville, and back to New Orleans. That's the Mojo Triangle. And you look in history books and see how many artists and how much music come out of that area. And don't ask me why, I don't know. Bunch of cotton pickers, I'll tell you that.
Elvis's particular fusion of blues and country seemed to spring from the very soil of Memphis. But over on the West Coast, things were different. Guitar music was dominated by the clean-picking style of Merle Travis. Veteran of 1,000 cowboy radio spots and Hollywood shorts known as Soundies. Merle was born in Kentucky, but California was where the work was, and where the guitar was about to take its next leap forward. When the guitar took on a solid body and was reinvented for the modern world. And this is the man who did it. Leo Fender, a radio repairman from California, did more to spread the gospel of the electric guitar than any individual before or since. But the man whose name is forever linked with the electric guitar never actually learned to play himself. He started tinkering with radios as a boy and went on to build amplifiers in his small factory in Fullerton, California. This Super 8 footage from the late 50s was only recently discovered and has never been shown outside the Fender boardroom. The Fender Telecaster, a single slab of wood with holes cut for the electronics and a bolt-on neck, was made for easy assembly. It was revolutionary, and together with a Fender amp, produced a clean sound which they were able to advertise as the very latest thing. And it got its name from another modern phenomenon that seemed to be taking over the world: television. It's been in continuous production since 1950, one of the most popular guitars ever.
It's sort of that much, so it's a much more lighter spring.
So who would be playing that then, basically?
Most of the country records are all played on it. People like the classic exponents of the Telecaster would be James Burton, who played on the Ricky Nelson records in the 50s, and he played for Elvis in the 1970s. Steve Cropper from Booker T and the MGs. A lot of the soul guitarists like the Telecaster. In a mix on a record, it doesn't take up so much space. It's a thinner sounding instrument. If you don't want loads of distortion on it and a cleaner, more twangy sound, Telecaster is a good basic guitar.
Provoked by the success of the Fender Telecaster, the competition had to respond. The more traditional Gibson company, maker of all those finely crafted archtop and jazz guitars, was stung into action. The guitar wars had begun. Gibson were now ready to reconsider the solid body experiments that Les Paul started back in the early 40s. And this is the infamous log. So what did they make of the log in 1941?
They looked at it and laughed like hell. They thought it was awful. Gibson thought it was awful. Everybody thought it was terrible.
Now, there's one more thing to add to that.
Les had another trick up his sleeve.
Les, being sort of a unique individual and having a good sense of humor, he made these so that you can sort of imagine it as an actual guitar.
They said, you were the joke of Gibson for 10 years.
So they thought you were nuts, really?
Yeah, They thought I was a little strange.
Well, strange or not, Gibson realised they were missing out on a potentially huge market. They needed to catch up with Fender and make a solid body guitar of their own. It would be called the Les Paul.
So it all starts with the wood, right? Every great guitar has to be made from great wood. The secret of a Les Paul, which is our flagship model, is a combination of mahogany and maple woods. And these are pieces of mahogany that'll be married with a maple cap and then cut into the shape of a guitar. But these are the two basic elements of a Les Paul guitar that create the sustain and the power that you associate with a Gibson Les Paul.
These are very, very sought-after collectibles, with this particular one being $130,000. So people like these.
Do you play all, do you actually play all these, or?
Well, I play them and I cherish them.
Mm-hmm.
This is the top of the heap right here. There's no question about it. Look at the flame on that one.
Yes.
Look, it's quite unbelievable. This one is just it's perfect. 1959.
Here is a Gibson Les Paul from 1958. Same kind of thing. The 58s and 59s seem to be the ones that everybody's after.
You can listen.
How much is
Just
this?
listen for a minute. The sustain. Listen to it.
I'm not hearing anything.
You would, though, if it were playing, because it's famous for its sustain. You can just hold it.
Well, so you'd have to
play. You can go and have a bite. No, you still be hearing that one.
Yeah. And I actually had to wait a long time to find the right Les Paul. I didn't realize just how great these late 50s Gibsons actually were until I played them.
There has been some dispute as to just how involved Les was in all this.
He did not convince Gibson to make a solid body guitar. Gibson already knew they darn well had to do that. And for that matter, Les did not design the guitar from the ground up, nor did he invent the electric guitar or the solid body guitar. That had been done before.
But there's no doubting his advertising value at the time. Between 1950 and 1954, he and Mary had 16 top 10 hits.
It's a scarecrow for the garden. I still have to stuff the sleeves. Would you like to do a song?
Oh, all right.
We met, we kissed.
Remember, between 1953 and 1960, Mary and I were on 5 times a day, 5 times a week on radio and television. The electric guitar was being exposed greatly.
My days are years. Won't you please come back and dry my tears?
No matter what you play on the guitar, electric, acoustic, no matter what you do to the guitar, the person on the other end doesn't say it's an electric guitar, it's acoustical guitar. She says, I love that fellow playing that guitar.
So there's something about the instrument and the person together.
That's right.
And the sound that's made. It's not just the instrument, it's
no,
the person who
it's
plays
the
that
marriage. When I play the guitar, I find that if I hit the note here, it's different than hitting it here. Striking the note differently, mothering the note. When you play the note, you add vibrato to it, trill to it, or get off of it if it's not a good one, or what you wish to hear there. Okay, so all this has to do with your relationship with the instrument. instrument when I was a kid. Now the piano is way down the line, okay, and the electric guitar is far superior to any instrument ever.
And is that because, as you say, the person who plays a guitar can somehow own the sound?
He can own it. Yep, he can create it, and he can go looking for it, and they all are. And they all are looking for their sound.
The irony is that Les's sound was out of date not long after his guitar was in production. By 1955, rock and roll had come to town.
Oh, Maybelline, why can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline, why can't you be true? You done started back doing the thing you used to do.
And then there was this, the West Coast surf sound. And in Dick Dale's hands was a brand new weapon. As the solid body guitar war hotted up, Fender brought out their masterpiece, the Stratocaster.
And it was made in very simple principles, 2 pieces of wood bolted together. And Fender suffered a lot of derision at the time because they thought that's a very crude way of doing it, especially from people like Gibson. But of course, Leo Fender's original idea was when you wear the frets out, you just put a new neck on. It was tailor-made for mass production. The electrics could be made on the scratch plate, dropped onto the front of the guitar, the 2 bits of wood could be bolted together, so unskilled labour could put these guitars together. They're revered now, these early Fenders, but they were made by unskilled Mexican labour. They were thrown together, quite frankly, to get them out the door so the company could survive financially. Leo Fender's first guitar was a Telecaster, and Leo was an engineer. So everything was straight lines, hard edges, and you can look at that guitar and you think, yes, he designed that because he wasn't a guitarist. But when this one was developed, he had input from other musicians, also a guy who worked for him called Freddie Tavares, Hawaiian guy, who actually was a steel guitarist. He did the theme at the beginning of the Warner Brothers cartoons, that slide on the Hawaiian guitar, that was Freddie Tavares. But he had an eye for radiating curves. Everything on here has got radiating curves. And it's also contoured on the back and on the front here for comfort. So actually when you wear it, it tends to disappear. When you play a Telecaster, you feel like you're playing a plank, which has its own appeal, a workhorse appeal. But this is much more sexy.
When I first saw a Stratocaster properly, I realized that, in fact, it's a thing of sculpted beauty. If you look at the cross-section of the thing, it's just, you know, I mean, that could be something flying through space to me.
It curves in and it's chamfered on the top so that there are no hard edges to dig into the body, because he realized how sensitive guitar players are, and we need these little things.
First produced in 1954, it's become a design classic. Its sound still inspires passionate allegiance, and David Gilmour has a very early model indeed, serial number 0001.
I don't think it's the very first one ever made, but it's a 1954 Fender Stratocaster, and they don't get much better than this. I mean, this is about as perfect as a guitar can be. Well, Hank Marvin had a Fender Stratocaster, and that was what I wanted. I had a Hofner Club 60, which was as close to the Fender as I could afford when I was a young lad. Nice guitar, but I wanted that Stratocaster. And that's
why
what
did
I
you
went
want
for.
the Stratocaster?
Because Hank Marvin made it sound so good.
I started listening to the early American rock and roll guitarists, and they were mainly the guys who were on records by Elvis, Scotty Moore, Cliff Gallup on the Gene Vincent records, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, James Burton and a few others. And ultimately, the guitar that took my fancy was the one I saw in Buddy Holly's hand on the first Crickets album. So Cliff offered to buy me a guitar, and I thought, yeah, the Fender's the way to go.
January the 26th, 1958. Buddy caused a sensation when he appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, but his guitar is almost inaudible in the studio sound mix after a backstage row with Ed, who thought the song was far too raucous. At least the Strat was on TV in America. In the UK, it was a distant dream, thanks to a Board of Trade ban on American imports. But that didn't stop Cliff Richard.
This was the first Stratocaster in the UK. And we went, oh, what is that? Look at this, look at that. If you saw this in, I think it was about May of 1959, we literally went, can I touch it, you know? And it cost him, I think, about 140 guineas, as it was then. And he brought it literally for Hank to play, gave it to Hank, said, you play all that. And Hank played all the solos and the hits on it. So it's...
And today it's priceless.
It's worth a few bob now. Yeah. Is that an offer?
Let me see what I've got, some more change.
It's a very fine guitar. It's a funny situation, that one, because I had dinner with Cliff a couple of years ago, and I said, what's the story about that Stratocaster? Did you give it to Bruce? He said, no, I didn't. He said he asked me if he could borrow it, and he's never given me it back.
And that was 32 years ago. I've had it ever since. And he's not getting it back.
I mean, what you wanted, as everybody will have talked about, is the red Stratocaster. I mean, when I went to the cinema in 1961 and I saw The Young Ones with Cliff Richard, and there's a moment where there's all this sort of wet stuff going on between Cliff and Eunice Stubbs, and then suddenly there's a cut, and the Shadows are doing the Savage. It was just like, there's two red Strats and a red precision bass and the steps. And I mean, that was it, you know, and that was it for everybody.
This is the one that I wanted. It had to be red.
Why?
Well, I had an EP with the Shadows on the front. And there, round Hank's neck, was this red Strat. I saw actually a flamingo pink one in the shop at the bottom of the main road where I lived. And I remember standing outside the shop for hour after hour, just looking at the guitar. So it became a real object of desire, you know. Unfortunately, they cost over £160, and my dad couldn't afford it. It was years of pestering. And eventually it ended up with a £50 guitar called a Hofner, which was a kind of a copy, really. And I loved that. My first guitar, I mean, I think probably slept with it, and I didn't have the nerve then to ask Dad for an amplifier.
So it quickly became the trademark of the band. They were all equipped with these red Fenders. And everybody aspired to a red guitar. You couldn't afford a Fender. The average weekly wage was about £6 if you were lucky. And back in those days, a red guitar was a symbol of rebellion.
Yeah.
The bar, that was the main asset of the Fender Stratocaster. That was the first one with a inbuilt vibrato system. And Hank perfected the art of playing within his hand, so he was constantly wobbling it at the same time.
If you wobble it slightly, you get a vibrato like a human voice. And that really appealed to me because playing any kind of solo, particularly a slow one, I always wanted to try to get a more vocal approach to it. And I found too that I could hit notes and after hitting the note, bend the string down, wobble it, and if I ran out of ideas, just shake it, you know.
Rock's such a strange thing. It has to be entertaining. You have to sell tickets. It has to be fun. You have to be able to dance to it. But it's almost that something more is required of it. Where the guitar came into it for me is it gave me something which was more than something on which you played a tune. I don't know if this is true for Eric. I don't know if it's true for Jimmy Page, but it was definitely true for Jimi Hendrix.
He was making the most advanced, strange noises you could make on any instrument in the whole world because there were no keyboards. There was nothing you could make that kind of sound on except an electric guitar.
And as a shaman, which he was, you know, he was able to sort of channel light or something in some bizarre way. If you didn't ever see Jimi Hendrix perform, you know, you've just missed it. Sorry, you've missed it. You know, I missed Charlie Parker, so fuck off. You know, it's nothing you can do about it.
This is Jimi Hendrix's Stratocaster. He famously set fire to it at a London performance over 40 years ago. Hendrix is perhaps the greatest rock guitarist the planet has ever known. And this sorry-looking object is both a sacred relic of a moment in rock history and a reminder that in the end it isn't the guitar, but what you do with it that really counts.
Next week, we get personal.
There's nothing quite as rewarding as having a Marshall amp on and hitting the big E chord.
Guitar players tend to be similar in a lot of ways as human beings.
Very natural, feels more natural than talking.